I don't suppose people in Iran give a stuff about making Iran great again. I mean, this is a Trump sort of soundbite that might go down very well with the Republicans, but quite frankly, for the rest of us in the world, it's pretty meaningless. What I think Trump means is regime change is really the supreme leader being taken out.
Hi, I'm Fergus Macphee, and welcome to the Trump Report on Times Radio. A reminder, you can watch us every day, Monday through Friday, on our YouTube channel, and you can also listen to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Joining me today, once again, is the former British Army Colonel, Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. Hamish, good morning and welcome to the Trump Report.
Good morning, and thanks very much for having me.
Now, we are talking this morning after the US struck Iran's nuclear sites over the weekend. Donald Trump took to Truth Social in typical fashion last night and he proclaimed bullseye and he called it an obliteration. What was your initial reaction to the news as it happened over the weekend?
Well, my initial reaction was I was slightly surprised, and that is probably exactly what the Americans would have hoped. Somebody like myself, who's an expert in nuclear weapon defense, and somebody who probably knows a little bit more about most people about these sort of things. The mood music coming out of the White House and the Pentagon was basically the supreme leader had two weeks to consider what he was doing. But the Americans have very clearly signposted exactly what their plans were, and most particular what their plans were of using B-2s and the weapon, the massive ordnance penetrator, which is probably the only weapon that could destroy Iran's deep-seated centrifuges, those under the ground, particularly at Fordo. So a little bit surprised, and that when you actually look into the mission itself, the deception and the planning going into it was phenomenal. A lot of people, and I even wrote a piece in one of the Rit Tops on Saturday, saying that potentially the B-2s were heading towards Diego Garcia, and they would be launched, which would make sense because it was much closer to Iran, short flight. But then, of course, in retrospect, that then had to get the British government to agree to it, et cetera, et cetera. So when you look at the comprehensiveness of the operation, we understand a couple of B-2s actually flew to Guam, which is heading east out of the States, not heading west rather out of the States rather than east, which is what they had to go to Iran. And then when you look at the complexity of the raid, many thousands of miles, 22 hours in total, I think, the flying time, multiple refuels, but not just these 7 B-2s with, we understand, their 14 massive ordnance penetrators, but a submarine firing 75 cruise missiles, fighter jets joining the flight close to Iran to subdue the air defense and the Iranian Air Force, and precision strikes on 3 sites, Isfahan, Nuntaz, and most importantly, Fordo. Of course, battle damage assessment not back, but there is probably no military past or present that could have conducted such an operation. And before we go into the detail of it, I think the message that it sends was phenomenal. And we talk mostly about Ukraine. I hope Putin is sitting in the Kremlin, pondering the future. If the US can do this, just imagine if they put a bit of that weight behind Ukraine. This is way beyond anything that Putin could do. So a long answer to your initial question. I was surprised, and crikey, I think the supreme leader in Iran was a bit surprised, and so was the rest of the world. So in that respect, it had absolutely the impact that was required.
When you see an operation as sort of sophisticated and as complicated as this, does it sort of disappoint you slightly, maybe, that he hasn't taken this action against Putin?
I wouldn't say disappointed, because at the moment, what one doesn't want is an escalation either in the Middle East or in the Ukraine that makes it worse. But I think the demonstration of military power is not being missed by anybody. And when you look at the capabilities that the US military has overall, I mean, this is just one of them. But when you look at it overall, if they decided to flex that muscle in support of Ukraine, then I think the Russian invasion of Ukraine would be over quickly. And I think, President Putin will see that. It would appear the sophistication that the Americans have, and looking at what we've seen with Ukraine attacking sites across Russia, one could imagine that it would not be too extreme to say that the Americans could not put a mop through the window of the Kremlin. And, there might be a deep bunker under the Kremlin, but, I'm not sure that it's more than 200 feet deep. So I think the message it sends, and hopefully everybody is sitting up and listening, not just, trying to work out whether Iran still has a nuclear weapon capability.
The strike hit 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities. I think we've all seen those images circulated of, the big craters in the ground. But is Trump right when he says that the threat has been obliterated? Has Iran at the moment lost its capabilities to make nuclear weapons?
Well, I would probably not use the word obliterated. But I would say that I think Iran has lost its ability to produce a nuclear weapon anytime soon. And the reason I say this are really a number of things. We know that the Israelis have been preparing the battlefield, shaping the battlefield, as we call it. We know that the 3 main sites, Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordo, have now been absolutely hammered. And we know that 11 of the main nuclear scientists in Iran have been killed, and several of the key military leaders. So it is not just, everybody seems to be focused on the enriched uranium. If you have 95% enriched uranium, you have one element to make a nuclear device. There are a whole host of other things. There's a lot of guff being talked about at the moment that 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium left Fordo on Saturday, and that could be used to make a nuclear device. That is just bunkum. If we can see on open source social media, allegedly some trucks with 40 kilograms of enriched uranium moving around, do people not think the Israelis and the Americans are tracking this in finite detail? It is not an inconsiderable task to set up centrifuges somewhere. 60% enriched uranium does not get at you a nuclear device. You can't create a nuclear explosion. You need to have 95%. So just stepping back aside, so with their key nuclear facilities pretty much destroyed. Now, we don't know what's happening 200 feet underground at Fordo, but it looks like 3 or 4 MOPs are down there. And I would suggest whatever is down there ain't coming out again. And that's a good thing, because those 200 feet of rock are the ideal seal, if you like, to keep that uranium underground. But it just to sort of wind back forward again, do they still have a nuclear capability? Certainly not. I wouldn't say for a long time, months or years, not months, years, because it's everything else you need to be able to put this together. You've got the warhead, and then you've got to put it on a missile. And I would suggest that they do not have any highly enriched uranium enough to do that. And the final thing I'd say on this, Fergus, the Islamic State tried for years to make an improvised nuclear device and trying to buy highly enriched uranium, and they never got anywhere near it. And what people are talking about at the moment is that maybe Iran has a capability for a dirty bomb, which is in a different league. I've never known a successful dirty bomb. We're talking about blowing up some nuclear isotopes. It may have a little bit of local damage, but it is just not in the same category. So my assessment at the moment is they don't.
And before the strike happened, I think you said last week after Israel's initial strikes that there was only one response to Iran's nuclear threat, and it has now been delivered. So why now? Was there a sort of imminent threat that perhaps they were going to complete something before these strikes happened?
Well, I think it was precipitated about 2 weeks ago when we were talking, when actually the Iranians said that they, had all this highly enriched uranium, and the inference was that they were still, planning to do it, and actually it was really their only counter to the Israelis and the Americans, because the Iranian Air Force has sort of either failed to materialize or has been completely wiped out. Their air defense has been completely wiped out. So in effect, they were an open goal, and they might have thousands of tanks and thousands of soldiers, but against air power that the Israelis have, and absolutely against air power that the Americans have, they wouldn't last long. So it struck me as really we've always talked about the nuclear gold card. If you have a nuclear device, you're at the top table. You can negotiate, and I think that's what they were hoping to do. And President Trump obviously decided he wasn't going to negotiate. He was going to get rid of it, so that when he did negotiate with the Iranians, it would be on a slightly different level.
And the fact that you now said they're in no position to make something anytime soon, does this explain why perhaps Iranian leaders said last night that the US has made a grave mistake? They promised a decisive response. One of the things being discussed is the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz, but the response has been fairly limited so far. Is it a case that Iran aren't really in a position to retaliate?
I don't think they are in much of a position to retaliate. In the past, they would have used their proxies, mainly Hezbollah and the Houthis, and some of the Iranian militias in Iraq. That's what we've seen them before. But those three organisations really don't exist in any offensive capability now. So they can't do that. There's that. They're not partnered with Al Qaeda or ISIS these days. The idea of a sort of 9/11 attack on the states is fanciful. And when when the only thing they can do is shut the Straits of Hormuz, on the face of it, you think, well, that's pretty significant. But actually, is it? I mean, in a way, they're cutting off their nose to spite their face, because that's where they export all their oil from, which is the only thing they get foreign currency for. So if they can't do it, are the West, are we that bothered? There's plenty of other places we can buy our oil and gas, and anyway, it's the price has gone up to whatever it is, $80 a barrel the last time I looked. So it's going to be more expensive. So yeah, Straits of Hormuz, and the other thing they will be aware of. We've got this 7th or 6th or whatever it is US fleet steaming towards the Straits of Hormuz with the biggest aircraft carrier in the world, more air power, and they've got I think the Iranian leadership have been humiliated, and no doubt that I'm sure they're not stupid. The ultimate humiliation of having their blockade of the Straits of Hormuz just brushed past would be, total. So I think, and there's lots of talk, maybe they can do cyber attacks, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, maybe they can. But, when you look at the sophistication of Iran against, say, the US, we've also almost got a medieval country coming up against a modern one. So, yeah, a lot of rhetoric and a lot of hot air. I mean, the only slight challenge I think we're all having is sometimes the slightly mixed messages coming out of the White House, which confuse not just us, but probably everybody else. So I think it's hopefully that President Trump now he's got his great success, and now the Pakistan leadership have nominated him for the Nobel Peace Prize. Then he might take that as a win, and hopefully, as we've discussed earlier in this, focus on Ukraine and get Putin around the peace table as soon as possible.
Those confused messages you speak about, we'll bring it back to that. We'll bring it back to Donald Trump slightly. because I wonder if this attack could mean regime change. I'll read the whole post. Donald Trump again took to Truth Social last night, and he said it's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? He then wrote, MIGA, not MAGA, make Iran great again. I mean, what do you read into that? I guess how would the US even go about forcing regime change in Iran?
Well, I think there are two things here. I don't suppose people in Iran give a stuff about making Iran great again. I mean, this is a Trump sort of soundbite that might go down very well with the Republicans, but quite frankly, for the rest of us in the world, it's pretty meaningless. But that's just the way he speaks. But when it comes, and what I think Trump means is regime change is really the supreme leader being taken out, and what I not just as a nuclear defense person, but as an military intelligence expert, I am mightily impressed by the intelligence that the Americans, the Israelis have in Iran. And when they say they know where he is, you sort of think they probably do know where he is. And he can't hide deep enough underground to protect himself from a mob or several mobs. They might not kill him, but whatever's on top of him, he's never getting out. So I think maybe that is the inference. Now, I'm no great expert on the people of Iran, but I have been following it for many years. And you get the feeling that the vast majority of the rank and file people in Iran are not extremist religious zealots, as the Ayatollah and his close associates seem to be. There have been many protests about the subjugation of women, and also the very strong rule that these people have over the population, and the fact it's a very, very poor country, and they spend a heck of a lot on military stuff. So you get the feeling that actually the vast majority would like to see a slightly more democratic country and a slightly less extreme religious leadership.
So you wouldn't take those comments at all as almost a declaration of war and a potential to have boots on the ground?
No, absolutely not. I think those people who are saying we're at a Iraq 2003 moment really don't really know what they're talking about. I mean, having been there, I was there myself. It was very different. These were thousands of American and British and other tanks on the ground attacking into Iraq for WMD. This seems to me the right way to do it. Destroy the WMD with precise cuts and strikes and get rid of it, not go and hunt around for it with thousands and thousands of troops. I don't think there is any indication that the Americans and the Israelis intend to put boots on the ground, and certainly there is no indication that the UK would. So I don't see that at all. I think if a consequence of these attacks is a regime change, then that is probably a good thing, because it would appear the majority of people in Iran would like to see something new and something slightly more democratic than what they're used to.
I want to ask whether you think the world and other world leaders will sort of almost be on high alert now, because whatever you think about Donald Trump's second term as presidency, he is pretty much so far stuck to his America First ideology. This, at the moment, is sort of the direct opposite of that. So does this put the world on a slightly different footing on how to deal with Donald Trump?
When you say, are they concerned? I mean, if you're against him, as it were, if I was Putin, I would be thinking slightly differently this morning about life and the future. And the same with Kim Jong-un, another autocratic leader in North Korea. Certainly, I think when it comes to the allies, I hope, and we are the closest one. I hope that one is now more confident that Trump is not just hot air, and which changes his views as often as the wind changes. So one would hope that we can, and particularly focused on Europe, that now that Trump has flexed his military muscles against Iran, then that will have an impact in what's happening in Europe. And we all want peace there. I mean, whatever escalation might happen in the Middle East, and I really don't expect it to be very much, the main focus for our security in this country is what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. And again, it's listening to what these people say. Putin has told us for years that he wants the return to the Soviet Union borders. And that would mean if he defeats Ukraine, he cracks on and we will be at war with Russia. I'm hoping now that actually he's sort of double taking on that ideal. So whatever people think about Trump, I think this sort of marker in the sand might lead to de-escalation around the world rather than escalation.
Do you think, you mentioned allies of the US there, do you think the UK will be drawn into this? What we've heard from our leaders so far this morning has been, the talk of de-escalation, the talk to get around the negotiating table. They haven't publicly said whether they support the US strikes. Yeah. Do you think we'll be drawn in?
Well, I don't think we should be. And the main reason I say that is there is nothing that we have the Americans need. So, why would we offer a few jets? It would be a token. Those jets in Cyprus are there purely to protect, the British citizens in Cyprus and the Cypriots, who are our allies, from any potential missile attacks or drone attacks from Iran. I see absolutely no reason for Britain to get involved in this at all. I think one would like to see a little bit more positivity coming out of Whitehall at the moment to reflect that this was actually a good move. But we should not get drawn in. There is no reason for us to get drawn in anymore, except in a defensive mode of British citizens in that part of the world.
And on the other side of it, if European leaders are calling for de-escalation, I mean, are we really in a position at the moment where Donald Trump is likely to listen?
No, I don't. I think Donald Trump and the Americans will do what they're planning to do, and quite frankly, we need to realise that their main ally in all of this is the Israelis, and they will work together in that, and that's why they don't need us, and that's why we should stand back. But I think it does give us an opportunity, particularly when it comes to Europe and Ukraine, that a line has been drawn in the sand by Donald Trump, and if it appears to have been successful in Iran, the sort of person he seems to be, you would have thought he would want to flex that muscle to bring Putin to the peace table. Because that's what he's saying today, I think, or yesterday. We've done this, right, Iran, now negotiate a peace deal. You didn't want to negotiate it 2 weeks ago, which is why he's done this. This is his explanation. So, in a similar way, I would hope that he would now talk to President Putin. So, it's I look at it as a positive vein, and it all goes back to whether Iran still has a nuclear capability. In my assessment of what I've seen and what I know, I don't think they have, certainly not for years. Therefore, there is an opportunity for a decent peace deal in the Middle East. But what really affects us here in the UK is what's happening in Ukraine, not what's happening in the Middle East.
Well, just finally, you touched on it slightly there, but Iran's foreign minister is actually in Moscow today, and it's believed he's taken a letter with him from Supreme Leader Khamenei asking for Putin's support. So could this be the moment that sort of things change between Donald Trump and Putin?
Well, I think it might well be. If President Putin thought in the deep recesses of his mind that he might actually help out Iran, I would have thought now, looking at those holes in the Fordow nuclear site, he's probably thinking, no, I probably won't. And of course, what he could give them is air defense and missiles, but it's pretty clear that his focus is absolutely almost entirely on Ukraine, and he's not going to give away any capability to that. And let's not forget, last week in an irony beyond parody, President Putin offered to be the honest broker between the US and Iran. And, that is probably what he is likely to do. So I expect it is, desperation probably from the Iranians. The only ally of significance they have is the Russians. So they've gone screaming, crawling to the Kremlin to try and get some help. And I expect the only help they'll get is Putin's offer to negotiate with the Americans. So I don't see the Russians joining in with Iran to face up to the States and the Israelis. I think everybody, if Putin is going to do something that is positive for the world, then he'll help with peace negotiations.
Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, thank you so much for joining us on the Trump Report.
Thanks very much for having me.